Now that we've discussed the characteristics of Generation X and Generation Y, let's talk about how we can communicate with this generation, particularly the Millennials, who have difficulty communicating with each other except by text. So I want to show you something now, which is a test that's been around for a long time, and it has to do with how to communicate with the unconscious mind. Now, in this test, the idea is for you to count the number of times that the people wearing white pass the basketball. How many times do the people wearing white pass the basketball? Okay, how many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes, but did you see the gorilla? Now watch it again. See this? All right, most people will miss the gorilla. And it's looking at it now that you know there's a gorilla there, it's hard to miss it. In fact, you'd have trouble trying to black it out at this point. But the fact is that you have to be able to take the focus away from the unconscious mind and put it onto the conscious mind. This is all about the difference between a conscious and an unconscious mind appeal. So this is about the conscious versus the unconscious mind. The conscious mind appeal is hard evidence. It's the court's charge, for example. That's very hard for them. That's very hard evidence. That's something that they will have in the jury room with them. You want to wrap yourself in the court's charge. You want to use your language of the court's charge when framing your questions to your jurors, to your expert witnesses. You want to be talking in terms of the exact language that your damages will be in. I've heard it said that you don't want to talk about pain and suffering in mental anguish. You want to talk precisely about physical pain, mental anguish, physical disability, physical disfigurement. And you want them to understand that these are the elements of damage that they're going to be called upon to place a dollar value on. And so in the opening statement, you explain to them what their role is. They have to place a dollar value on these elements of damage. And then as you're going through your trial, as you come to evidence about that, for example, you're going to ask a treating nurse who was in the hospital room with the patient a question about pain and suffering. Well, you predicate that question with what I call a signpost. You say, all right, now let's turn to the issue of the physical pain suffered by Mr. Jones. And then you ask the question. That's a signpost telling them that, okay, now we're going to hear that evidence that we talked about on physical pain. So you wrap yourself in the court's charge, the language of the court's charge. Visual evidence is both. It's conscious and conscious mind appeal. Support by numbers. You want hard numbers to support your position on as many things as you possibly can, because those are conscious mind appeal. That's things that the conscious mind has to calculate. The focused effort to communicate with millennials is to focus them on a conscious mind appeal. What you saw and the relevance of the gorilla that you just saw is in watching that in the normal course of things. If you just watch the video without the task of counting the number of times that the people wearing white pass the ball, you would have easily seen the gorilla. It would have been very obvious because it would have been gathered by the unconscious mind, which just records everything. But when we gave you the task of counting the ball, counting the passes, that is a conscious mind process. So by giving you a conscious mind task, we overrode, if you will, your unconscious mind, which is why you saw the number of times the ball was passed, but you did not see the gorilla. So one of the ways that we have to communicate with people who have an unconscious mind that is thinking about everything in the world except this lawsuit is to keep them focused. And that's certainly the millennials, and to a very large extent, Gen X also. So the unconscious mind appeal is basically the communication that you want to make in the present tense. When you tell your story, there's a reason why you tell your story in the present tense. Teddy Koskoff taught me early, showed me how he sat in front of a jury. He pulled up a chair. He was talking about the death of a family, a father, a husband, and the prominent family member. And so he pulled up a chair and he said, he's not here to speak for himself, so I want to speak for you in his stead. So he spoke to the jury in the present tense, in the first person, as the deceased plaintiff. And it is powerful stuff, but it's powerful because telling things in the present tense resonates in the unconscious mind. The past tense and the future tense do not resonate in the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind gathers everything that's happening right now. Visual images, and the more color the better. The more vivid colors the better. It resonate, and they're observed and they're stored in the unconscious mind. For example, if that gorilla had been wearing a red furry outfit as opposed to a black one just blending in with the black and white, you wouldn't have overridden it by the conscious mind. And here's a very important factor. Don't talk about negatives. Don't say the doctor failed to do this, the driver failed to do that. Avoid negatives, because negatives do not record in the unconscious mind. When you yell at that child across the room, do not drop that glass. The next thing you hear is the crash of glass, because the not does not register in the unconscious mind. More importantly, when we say that the doctor failed to do this, the failure part, he did not do this, the failure part doesn't really resonate in the unconscious mind. It has to be calculated by the conscious mind. You want to communicate in the unconscious mind, which is where your fundamental decision making takes place, and then it's ratified in the conscious mind. So the way you would say that is this. You avoid the negatives. You say, the doctor chose to do the following. In a medical negligence case, you could say, the doctor was confronted with this set of symptoms. And confronted with that body of symptoms, he could have chosen to do A, he could have chosen B, he could have chosen D, C, or he could have chosen D. If he had chosen A or B or C, we wouldn't be here today, because this tragedy would not have occurred. Instead, he chose D, which was to send the patient home without being treated. And that's why we're here today with a wrongful death case. It's the choice to do something wrong, not that he failed to do anything. And it's same thing applies. The driver chose to break the law, to break the rules of the road, by traveling 70 in a 55-mile zone. Those rules are there for a reason. They're to protect the other members of the public on that highway. He chose to break that rule, and you see the consequences. That type of argument. That is an unconscious mind appeal. Rhetorical devices. These are your metaphors and your analogies, and the rule of three. Metaphors are powerful, powerful tools. When you give a metaphor about any situation, the metaphor is calculated. It goes directly and communicates directly in the unconscious mind. It's not something that the conscious mind has to stop and do. Analogies, the same thing. Powerful analogies. I give a whole speech just on rhetorical devices and how to use rhetorical devices. Analogies are the same way. Powerful analogies will resonate directly in the unconscious mind, where the decision making takes place. There's no question that we put things together in threes. When you talk about three separate things, how important it is to couch things in terms of threes. Ask Governor Perry about that. It's just a simple fact that our mind is devised in such a way that we remember things in threes. So do things in threes: of the people, by the people, for the people. The rhetorical question is extremely powerful. And so, ladies and gentlemen, who is going to correct the grave injustice that has been visited upon this plaintiff by the negligent conduct of this defendant? If not you, who? And if not now, when? That's a powerful rhetorical question. I've used it many times. Seek similarities, because similarities resonate in the unconscious mind. We like people who are like ourselves. We find ourselves, you go to a gathering, a networking, and you meet somebody and you like them, and you're describing them later and say, you know, we had a lot in common. I like this guy. We had a lot in common. We were a lot alike. We seek similarities because we like people who are like ourselves. So we seek jurors who will be similar to and have the same likes and dislikes and understandings as our plaintiff, as our expert witness, as us. Just be careful about having someone too similar because of defensive attribution. Anchoring is another topic that you really need to learn a lot about. I mentioned it about having an anchor so that when the judge calls your name, the jury expects something to happen. You do that by making something happen when the judge calls your name. Nonverbal communication, vocal communication, and neuro-linguistic programming. Nonverbal communication, the reason it's 55% of the persuasive process is because it occurs in the unconscious mind where decision-making takes place. Vocal, same thing, 37% of the persuasive process because it occurs in the unconscious mind. Neuro-linguistic programming is all about communicating with the unconscious mind. I would want to learn as much as I could possibly learn about that, and I have. It's powerful stuff.